6, we were already talking about a past tense in Spanish, and the past tense is called the preterite or preterito. And we know that the past tense, meaning the preterito, is a tense that is used to talk about an event that happened at a specific point in the past. Normally, when we use the preterito, we use it with a specific time expressions, such as ayer, el mes pasado, 2 days ago, last week, last month, in 1924. Normally, when we use the past tense preterito, we know when the action started in the past and also when they ended in the past. Now we're going to talk about another past tense in Spanish, and this past tense is called the imperfect. Okay, so now let's talk about the imperfect. ¿Cuándo usamos el imperfect? Okay, so the imperfect is used when we wanted to talk about an event that happened in the past tense, but we do not know exactly when the event could have started or ended. Okay, so now we have some examples in here. For instance, the niño Carlos vivía en Honduras. Okay, so as a child, Carlos lived in Honduras. Los mayas comían mucho maíz. The mayas ate a lot of corn. Cuando estaba en Madrid, Julieta trabajaba con su tía. When she was in Madrid, Julieta worked with her aunt. As we see in all these examples, actually the 3 examples that we have in here, the action occurs over an extended period of time, but it's not specific when it started or stopped. Okay, so now we're going to see how do we conjugate the imperfect tense. Okay, so as we have on this slide, we're going to see that we have the verb hablar, the verb comer, and the verb vivir. So for the verbs that ends in R, in this case, the example that we have is hablar, we're going to keep the stem habl, and then we're going to add aba for the first person singular, yo. We're going to use abas for the second person singular, tú. We're going to add aba for the third person singular, él, ella, usted, aba. For the first person plural, nosotros, nosotras, we're going to add habamos. Okay. For the second person plural, vosotros, vosotras, we're going to add habáis. And for the third person plural, ellos, ellas, ustedes, we're going to add hablan. So we have yo hablaba, tú hablabas, él, ella, usted hablaba, nosotros, nosotras hablábamos, vosotros, vosotras hablabais, ellos, ellas, ustedes hablaban. Now, when it comes to the verbs ending in er and ir, as we already know from previous tenses, they always going to conjugate very similar. Okay, so with comer, in this case, we're going to keep the stem com, and then we're going to add ia for the yo, ias for tú, for él, ella y usted, we're going to add ia, for nosotros y nosotros íamos, for vosotros y vosotras íais, y for ellos, ellas y ustedes ían. That way we'll have comía, comías, comía, comíamos, comíais, and comía. And the same thing with vivir. So we're going to keep the stem beep, and we're going to add ia for the yo form, ias for the tú form, ia for the él, ella y usted form, íamos for the nosotros, nosotras form, íais for the vosotros y vosotras form, and ían for the ellos, ellas y ustedes form. So that way we'll have yo vivía, tú vivías, él, ella, usted vivía, nosotros, nosotras vivíamos, vosotros, vosotras vivíais, ellos y ellas y ustedes vivían. So now we learn how to conjugate it. Now let's go see what other instance did you use the imperfect for. For instance, we use the imperfect for descriptions of things in the past. So the first example we have is el coche era muy viejo. So the car was very old. So we describe it how the car looked like, right? So we can also use it to describe people. And when we use it to describe people, we have 4 different examples. So the first one is la mujer era alta. So the woman was tall. It's describing her physically. The second one is la mujer era muy alegre. So the woman was very happy. So it described how her character is or was. Okay. The third one is la mujer estaba cansada. Here is the woman was tired. Here is describing her physical state. How is she feeling? And then number 4 is la mujer era religiosa. So it's describing a belief that this woman had. She was a religious woman. Okay. Another instance that we used in imperfect is to describe time, weather, or situation. Okay, so here we're going to see an example for each of this. So the first one is about weather. So hacía frío el otro día. So it was cold the other day. And eran las 3 de la tarde cuando Pedro llegó. It was about 3 o'clock when Pedro arrived. La biblioteca estaba abierta cuando llegamos. The library was open when we arrived. And finally, it also is used to talk about action in progress, in the past, that they are interrupted by a punctual action. So what do we mean by this? Okay, so celebraba mi cumpleaños cuando llamó mi amigo Luis. I was celebrating my birthday when my friend Luis called. So what I was doing, the celebration of my birthday, got interrupted by my friend's call, Luis. Okay, so these are additional uses that we have when we need to express an action in the past, but in the imperfect tense. Okay. Now we have learned when to use imperfect and how to conjugate it, and how to conjugate it with irregular tenses. Now we're going to see how do we conjugate it when it's irregular, when the imperfect is irregular. In this case, it's a little bit different than preterite. Preterite, we saw that it had many different verbs that they were irregular. However, with imperfect, we only have 3 verbs that they are irregular, and it is the ones that we're showing on these slides. So it's ir, ser, and ver. So ir is for yo, es yo iba, tú ibas, él, ella o usted iba, nosotros, nosotras íbamos, vosotros, vosotras ibais, ellos, ellas, ustedes iban. For ser es yo era, tú eras, él, ella, usted era, nosotros, nosotras éramos, vosotros, vosotras erais, ellos, ellas y ustedes eran. And for ver is yo veía, and pay attention that the I, it has an accent. Tú veías, él, ella, usted veía, nosotros, nosotras veíamos, vosotros, vosotras veíais, y ellos, ellas y ustedes veían. So these are the only 3 irregular imperfect tenses that we have. Okay. Now we saw that the imperfect tense, we use it to talk about actions or events that happen in the past, but not necessarily we know what is the beginning of the end of the action. Also, we know that we use the imperfect whenever we need to talk about or describe a person in the past. And when we describe in the person in the past, it's not just describing the person physically. We might be also be talking about the character of the person, or we might be also be talking about how the person was feeling in the past. We also said that we used imperfect when we want to talk about the weather in the past, when we talk about the time in the past, and when we're talking about places in the past as well. And we also we use the imperfect when we are talking about actions that they're ongoing, and somehow they get interrupted. Like the example that we have in a previous slide is, I believe, celebrábamos mi cumpleaños cuando mi amigo Luis llamó. So I was celebrating my birthday when my friend Luis called. So the action of celebrating, it was interrupted by the action of my friend call. Okay, so these are the uses of the imperfect tense. So in Spanish we have preterito, which we use when we know exactly when the event took place in the past. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the slides, on the first slides, most of the times we know that it's preterito because we're going to have a specific expression like yesterday, the day before yesterday, last year, last month. However, with imperfect, as we mentioned it, we don't have a specific or mention at the time when the action started or when ended. We know that both of them, they are to talk about the past, and both of them, they have different uses.